The Cura de Ars, a memoir of Jean-Baptiste-Marie Vianney by Georgina Molyneux. Chapter 8. Installations of the missionaries at Ars, Marie Vianney's third and last attempt to escape from his ministry. Towards the close of the episcopacy of Bishop Devy, his thoughts were much occupied in devising plans for the future regulation of the Society of Young Missionaries, which had been formed under his auspices. One of his projects was to constitute Ars, the successor, as it were, of Pont-d'Ain, in order that the young men might pass a kind of novitiate, where they would have before them the edifying example of the Abbé Vianney. The death, however, of this prelate occurred before this design could be practically realized, and it was left to his successor, the bishop of his choice, to carry his wishes into effect. The Abbé Touquiner writes, "I have performed the duties of the annual retreat at the Grand College of Bruhl, and was prepared to return to the welcome solitude of Pont-d'Ain, when I was informed by my superior that the Lord Bishop Chenelon, in fulfillment of the intention formed by his revered predecessor, designed us for auxiliaries to the Cura de Ars, and that I was to be the first to represent the society in that capacity. The following day, I was installed by M. the Vicar General. The Abbé Vianney received me with his usual kindness. I remarked, however, a certain melancholy in his countenance, and the reserve in his manner which was not usual with him. That yearning for solitude, which, however suppressed, had yet never ceased to be the darling desire of the Cura de Ars, was at this time revived with fresh energy. The change which had taken place at Ars again appeared to him to offer a favorable occasion for abandoning a ministry, the responsibility of which he felt to be more and more burdensome in proportions as his fame and reputation increased. From his peculiar constitution and character, this exceptional ministry brought with it for him peculiar and painful trials. It involved the entire abnegation of all the preferences of his heart, the complete sacrifice of all his natural tastes, the thought of flying to L'Etap, to Carmel, to the Grands Châteaux, or to some remote desert, pour y pleurer se pauvre vie et soyez, si le bon Dieu voudrait bien, encore lui faire miséricorde, was for a long time his fixed idea. The details of his escape from Ars, when he remained for 8 years concealed in the paternal home at Dardilly, have already been laid before the reader. 3 years before that attempt, he made another effort of the same kind. He left his presbytery on that occasion, on a very dark night, and had proceeded as far as the Croix de Combe. There he suddenly stopped and said to himself, "Am I at this moment acting accordingly to the will of God? Would not the conversion of one's soul be of more worth than all the prayers which I could offer up in solitude?" The response of his heart, which he regarded as the voice of God, determined him to retrace his footsteps. Now, however, that a missionary was placed at Ars, he once more resolved to retire to some profound and inaccessible retreat, where he would be free from all pastoral responsibility, and at leisure to prepare to be his God. Accordingly, the day after the installation of M. Touquiner, he made every preparation for his departure. In order to this, he was obliged to take into his confidence his old friend and servant, Catherine Lessange, and also Jean Philippe, who, since the suppression of the Providence, had shared with her the charge of her ménage. But though he imposed upon them the strictest secrecy, and took every other possible precaution to prevent detection, his intention was discovered, his flight was intercepted, and a repetition of the same scene that had occurred on the former occasion, already described, followed. Was this difference, however, that this time Marie Vianney appeared to be more resolutely determined than ever to carry out his purpose. For a long while, the tears and entreaties of his friends, and the grave admonitions of those upon whose judgment he was accustomed to rely with humble trust, was utterly vain. He continued inflexible and unwavering. It was even asserted by some of the witnesses of this scene that the tone of Vianney's voice and the expression of his countenance, habitually so amiable and serene, betrayed a degree of mingled vexation, irony, and depression in which he had never before manifested, and which caused much surprise. It would be useless and only tedious to the reader to go over all the details of the long and painful struggle which took place between the obstinate priest and his devoted people in this his third and last attempt at flight. It will perhaps be sufficient to say that he was in the end overborne and induced, at length, to yield to what he believed to be a manifestation of the divine will. From the time he regarded the longing of his heart for repurpose in solitude and prayer as a temptation, it was one, however, which rose up under one form or another again and again to trouble him, and he was repeatedly heard to say, que c'était une chose affreuse de passer d'un cours au tribunal de Dieu. Chapter 9. Honors conferred upon Marie Vianney. Homage rendered to his piety. In the meantime, the fame and popularity of Marie Vianney continues to be on the increase. It has, indeed, been doubted whether any other man in the present age has enjoyed so universal a reputation. And when we consider how poorly he was endowed by nature, when we reflect upon that intellectual inferiority, which he called his ignorance, we cannot refrain from expressing our astonishment at the extraordinary impression which he made upon the Roman Catholic world. Whatever was the stage of their religious faith, whatever the class of society to which they belonged, the strangers who visited Ars during the lifetime of the cure all carried away with them at the same sentiment of profound admiration and respect. Even those pilgrims who professed no Christian faith were, in a manner, fascinated and enchained by the marvelous drama enacted before their eyes, and they regarded to the singular man who performed in the leading part as a perfect model of penitence and charity. One individual belonging to this class, a distinguished scholar, but a sceptic, was heard to exclaim in his enthusiasm, Je ne crois pas depuis l'étape de Bethlehem, on n'est rien vu de pareil. A celebrated poet, who has desired to make the acquaintance of the Cura de Ars, was so carried away by his emotion, after having seen and heard him, that he cried out in his presence, Jamais je ne contemple Dieu de si près. It is true, my friend, replied Vianney, pointing to the Holy Sacrament exposed upon the altar. It is true, God is not far off. We behold him there in the sanctuary of his love. When the poet continued to address the cure in terms of eulogy, the latter took him by the hand and, gently interrupting him, said, My friend, I love these words of Saint J. If men knew us better, they would say of us more harm and less good. The poet then spoke of the church, in the edification of which he was interested. The material church, responded Vianney, will certainly be constructed. The important consideration is how to raise up the spiritual edifice in our hearts, the living tabernacle where the Lord will be pleased to dwell. When he had retired after having received the blessing of the Cura de Ars, Jasmine exclaimed, What a type of holiness! That man is greater than his name. Macru, the marine missionary, came to Ars on his return from his last voyage to the islands of the archipelago. He was asked what he thought of the venerable cure, if he esteemed him a man of learning. Of human learning, no, replied he, but of divine learning, oh yes. But what strikes me above all, continued he, is his beautiful simplicity. In him I have seen a little child, such as the Saviour loved, and therefore it is that God is with him. On looking over the record of my past experience, writes a priest, I find amongst the days which have influenced my afterlife, and which I got to observe with gratitude, the date August 21st, 1832, preceded by these words, Visit to Ars. It was then indeed that I first set my foot upon that hollow ground, whither I have so frequently returned, where I have shed so many tears, formed by so many resolutions, and of which the very name penetrates the depths of my heart. It would be superfluous to dwell upon all the marks of love, confidence, and admiration which were lavished upon Marie Vianney during his long ministry. The continued and ever-increasing conflux of pilgrims at Ars for the space of 30 years has been sufficiently noticed. The names of all the eminent men who were attached thither it would be impossible to recount. The Abbé Molyneux states that curiosity one day prompting him to look over the list of visitors at an hotel, he found there the most illustrious names in France, Belgium, England. Distinguished men from London, Dublin, Edinburgh, Brussels, Cologne, Munich, travelers from the shores of the Mississippi, the Ohio, and La Plata. We have before us a long list of the names of the princes and bishops of the Romish Church who came to render their homage to the humble priests of Ars. Amongst them is that of the Cardinal de Bolland. He had, during his visit, a long conference with Vianney in his poor chamber. On going out from this confidential interview, he said to the Abbé Tolkien, Do you know, monsieur, that the Cura de Ars was la question de Vianney? Some days after his departure, the almoner of His Eminence sent to the holy priest a beautiful chaplet blessed by Pius IX, and accompanied by these words, Ars, terre de miracle. Nous n'avons fait qu'y toucher son souvenir nous est resté vif et profond. Peut-être un jour ce bonheur sera-t-il plus complète. J'aime en garde l'espérance. The Bishop of Orleans, messenger to Penloup, came several times to seek edification at Ars. He confided to some friends that the good cure had tried to quiet his fears relative to his great pastoral responsibility with these words, There are many bishops in the martyrology, but hardly any cures. It is I, my lord, who have need to tremble. Bishop Vianney, on his way to take possession of the see of Valence, came to ask the blessing of the Cura de Ars. Marie Vianney could not bear the idea of seeing a bishop kneel before him. However, as his superior insisted, he consented to make upon him the sign of the cross. But falling at the same moment upon his own knees, he exclaimed, My lord, this blessing will rebound upon myself. On the 3rd of May, 1845, whilst crowds of pilgrims were stationed round the church, awaiting the arrival of the saint, a simple carriage drove up and a priest, enveloped in a long cloak, descended. Underneath the folds of his drapery, however, a white robe was soon discovered, and everyone cried out, Voilà le grand prédicateur. It was thus that the people of France designated the great Dominican, La Cordillère. It was indeed he, and the following day the inhabitants of Ars had the infinite delight of seeing the illustrious orator, who is said to have thrilled the very hearts of his hearers, and his preaching had just made an almost unapparelled sensation at Lyons, listening in the attitude of devout attention to the simple discourse of their beloved cure. Vianney dwelt so much on this occasion on the peculiar office of the Holy Spirit, and earnestly exhorted his hearers to invoke his constant aid. P. Lacoudure appeared to them much affected by his earnest and affectionate address. He remarked afterwards that if he had treated the same subject, he should not have used the same terms, but that he should have been inspired by the same sentiments. This holy priest and I do not speak the same language, said he, but I am so happy as to be able to testify to myself that our thoughts are agreed. It is now Lacordier's turn to preach. Vianney was very solicitous to hear the eloquent monk, and pressed him with earnest entreaties. The Père, however, only yielded to his wishes when he was convinced that in refusing to do so, he would fail to manifest his deference, and he still complained at having to speak when he would fain again have been a listener. "I came," said he, "to seek counsel and instruction." If Lacordaire was impressed by the preaching of Vianney in his turn was equally astonished and enraptured by the eloquence of Lacordaire. The elevation of his sentiments, the beauty of his utterance, above all, his amazing power of speech, produced upon the imagination of the zealous and devoted priest a species of enchantment. "I can hardly venture to appear again in my pulpit," said he. "I am like the prince, who, after having offered his horse to the Pope, did not dare to mount it again himself." Vianney appears to have been much affected by the humble and unaffected demeanor of the celebrated man towards himself. "Do you know what especially struck me?" said he, during the visit of the Père Lacordaire. "It was the idea that all that was greatest in science had come to humble itself before all that was least in ignorance." The two extremes met. On someone's remarking, when the prodigious effect of the conference at Lyons was discussed in his presence, that nevertheless few conversions were stated to have resulted from them. "There will be an immense result," said he, "if the preacher has proved to the scholar that there exists a higher wisdom than theirs, intolerable esprit, then that there are attainments to be acquired superior to any which they had aspired. It is necessary first to discover them, the beauties of this edifice, in order to excite their desire to enter into it." Thus, the favorable impression left by this memorable visit was complete and reciprocal. The celebrated pilgrim appears to have been much edified by the piety of the Cura de Ars. In referring to the private conversation that he had with Vianney, he affirmed that he had gathered from him many useful hints, and much positive ground for hope with respect to the re-establishment of the Frères Pécheurs. Apropos to the instruction which he had received from the Cura de Ars, he said, "Les sciences que la vie ne les comble pas, le petit il l'illumine, l'élève et le remplit." Not satisfied with seeing and hearing the Cura de Ars, the pilgrims were all eager to possess themselves of such memento of him, some object that he had blessed, or an image that he had signed, or anything that had belonged to him. It had been Vianney's habit, when he left the chapel, to place his surplice upon the wall of the churchyard till his return, but that he was soon obliged to discontinue this practice. It would quickly have been cut into fragments by the merciless people. It was the same with his hat, which during the long séances at the confessional he could not protect from those pious frauds, and so also with his cassock, which in like manner was attacked and mutilated on every possible occasion. During his catechisms, women, armed with scissors, crept softly behind his stall, and stole away locks of his hair. Sometimes, when they pulled too hard, he would turn round and gently admonish them to leave him alone. But generally he did not appear to be aware of the feminine frauds which were practiced behind his back. Leaves are taken out of his breviary, till at length he was obliged to keep it concealed from the eyes of the pilgrims. His chairs, his table, his books, nothing escaped. The very straw was stolen from his bed. And even the trees which grew in his courtyard, and the little flowers which bloomed in the grass that carpeted it, were alike subjected to the cruel tax that was levied upon all and everything that lay within the sacred precincts of the presbytery. The Cura de Ars never could be brought to consent to the earnest and repeated solicitations of the various artists, painters, and photographers, who at different periods came to Ars with the hope of studying, and of being able to reproduce his remarkable physiognomy. Nevertheless, attempts at his portrait were everywhere to be seen. Not only were they scattered in rich abundance over the village of Ars, but they penetrated to the most distant and remote localities, and have been found in the chalets of Switzerland, and amongst the household gods of the peasants of Uri and of Underwalden. The continual exhibition of his portrait, which in every guise, and sometimes under the most grotesque forms, was affixed to the door of every house in the village, offended the eye and vexed the heart of the cur. In the end, however, he became accustomed to this, as to many other mortifications. Nevertheless, as he took his daily walk from the presbytery to the church, pursued by the ovations of the multitude that thronged his footsteps, it was remarked that his air was embarrassed, and that he kept his eyes carefully bent upon the ground. When, through any inadvertency on his part, his unwilling glance fell upon one of these offensive pictures, he would exclaim, "Always a vile portrait! How am I? On me pont, on me bund. Poor Cura de Ars." In the year 1852, an artist from Avignon, struck by Vianney's saintly expression of countenance, succeeded in taking a portrait from memory, which was, before the remarkable work of Cabuquet, the best that had appeared. When it came to the turn of Cabuquet, he ensured, as he thought, the success of his enterprise by securing in advance the interest and cooperation of Bishop Chalendin. Previously to the artist's arrival at Ars, that prelate wrote a letter to Vianney, in which he earnestly prayed him to consent to sit for his portrait. The cur, however, was still inflexible, and contented himself with saying, "I will comply with the lordship's request. I provided that he will afterwards consent to my departure from Ars." Reduced now to the same condition with those who had made the attempt before him, the young artist nevertheless did not lose courage. He attended the catechisms every day, hid himself in the crowded congregation, assumed an air of attention, and modeled his wax in the crown of his hat. Notwithstanding, however, this irreverent conduct in church, Emilien Cabuquet appears to have been a devout Catholic. He had not been many days at Ars before he expressed his desire to confess the good Father. "Do not betray yourself," said the missionary to whom he first addressed himself, "and let no one suspect your design in coming here. You would be made to do penance by breaking your model." In spite of this caution, however, the pious artist could not refrain from informing Marie Vianney that he was the author of the statue of St. Vincent de Paul, lately inaugurated at Châtillon, and upon the cur's courteously congratulating him, he gathered courage to say, "My father, I am ambitious again to do something in order that the Lord may be further known and magnified in his saints." Marie Vianney at once divined his object, and changing his tone, he exclaimed with some severity, "No, my friend, it is useless. Neither for you or for the Lord Bishop will I ever consent." A few days after this conversation, when engaged in this catechism, the cur again recognized his penitent, who, in order to command a better view of his face, had installed himself directly opposite the little platform from whence he addressed the people. "Ah, my friend," said he, "you have distracted the attention of my people long enough, and of myself also." The patient modeler was not a little disconcerted by this apostrophe, and though happily his work was now far advanced, he thought it discreet to disappear for a few days. When he thought that the circumstances were sufficiently effaced from the mind of the cur, he returned. "My friend," said Marie Vianney when he saw him again at his post, "have you then nothing to occupy you at home?" "Monsieur le Curé, do you wish to dismiss me from your presence?" "No, my friend, but I would fain have you excommunicated." "What crime have I then committed?" "Oh, you know very well. Have you not again distracted my attention this morning?" "One of the happiest events of my life, afterward," remarked Emilien Cabuquet, "is to have made the acquaintance of the Cura de Ars. It is necessary to have first seen the saints, in order to know how to represent them." About this time, the CANAL, which appears to be considered a high and honorable distinction in the Romish Church, was conferred upon Vianney by the hands of Bishop Chenelon, and at the same period, upon the recommendation of Count Emmanuel de Cotoligon, prefect of Ain, and the Bishop of Belley, and at the request of the Marquis de Constantine, he received the Cross of the Legion of Honor in acknowledgment of his piety and of the services he had rendered to the Church. The Cura only wore the camille upon the ceremony of its reception, and with respect to the Cross of Honor, those who were the bearers of it felt necessary in order that they might be able to state that he had accepted it to induce it in him the belief that they were relics which were presented to him. "Oh," said he with a sigh of disappointment when he opened the casket that contained it, "is it that only that?" A few days afterwards, when the prefect of Ain came to Ars to congratulate the new chevalier, the Cura said to him, "You should have conferred this decoration upon a more worthy object." "That would have been difficult," courteously replied N. de Cotillon. "If the emperor had bestowed upon you the cross, it is not to honor you, it is to honor the Legion of Honor." A propos, the different honors conferred upon Vianney, we must mention before we close this chapter a curious contest which took place between the inhabitants of Ars and Dardilly, respecting the future disposition of his body. The people of Dardilly had long looked with jealous eyes upon the treasure possessed by Ars, and they now began to devise the means for securing something of it for themselves. They went to Vianney and entreated him to make his will. They knew well that he reserved nothing of all that money, which the piety of the faithful placed in his hands. What they wanted was something far more precious than gold or silver, and they earnestly besought him to bequeath his mortal remains to his native parish. The Cura, who did not know how to refuse anything, yielded to their wishes and made his will accordingly. The secret transpired, the alarm quickly spread, not only through the district of Ars, but through the whole diocese of Belley. The case was represented to the bishop, who immediately interfered to allay the general apprehension. He asked the Cura why he designed to abandon, after his death, the parish which had for so long been the scene of his indefatigable labors. What reason he had for desiring that his body should rest in Dardilly. "Ah," replied the Cura, "provided only that my soul is with God, I care not where my body rests." The bishop then preferred his own claim for the poor body, and Vianney, distressed and ashamed at all these rival pretensions, promised to make another will, which he did the day before his death, when, according to the desire of the bishop and the wishes of his people, he definitely disposed of his remains in favor of the parish of Ars. Thank you for joining me in this next chapter, chapters 8 and 9. I really hope all of you have a great day, and may God bless.
Gracias por vernos. Suscríbete al canal de Misión Ruah YouTube ahora para que podamos seguir difundiendo la misericordia de Jesús en el mundo entero. Y no te olvides de compartir, darle un me gusta, comentar y suscribirte al canal para ser un misionero Ruah más.